We are getting a signal that Professor Dershowitz has joined us. How are you, Professor? We have my last debate with you, I guess, was up in Boston, wasn't it, on a radio station?
That was a lot of fun.
We did have a lot of fun.
We have some different points of view.
We certainly do. But now I understand now that you are first of all, you're the author of a new book called Chutzpah,
right,
which has received excellent reviews.
Thank you.
You are also quoted here, and you can tell me whether it's accurate or not, with wanting the name J. Edgar Hoover removed from the FBI building because, and this is the quote, you tell me whether it's accurate, J. Edgar Hoover wired America's bedrooms, boardrooms, and caucus rooms, end quote. Is that an accurate reflection of your opinion, sir?
Absolutely, but I want to make one thing clear, that I called for the removal of J. Edgar Hoover's name from the building even before the building was built and even while J. Edgar Hoover was still alive. So I'm not one of these guys who only would do it as a coward after the man was dead.
Well, I
think that he was one of the greatest criminals in American history and very comparable to the founder of the the KGB in Russia, Felix Dershowitz, and I'm proud of the fact that the Russians have pulled down the statue of Felix Dershowitz, the founder of the KGB, in Moscow, and I think that the United States ought to follow that policy, not of pulling down any statues, obviously, but of recognizing the fact that J. Edgar Hoover was a terrible, dangerous man. I know that you worked for him and you had some admiration for him, but you surely must realize that he was breaking the law. I mean, much, much more than you ever broke the law. He broke the law.
Well, that's quite true that from time to time the FBI broke the law in that what we had were black bag men. We went into the consulates of the East Germans and things of that sort and all the rest of them. Well, I care about stuff like that because I think it was an excellent counter-espionage technique.
I have no problem.
But you know, with respect to breaking the law, would you disagree with me that from time to time persons who are of the same political persuasion, generally speaking, that you are, such as Martin Luther King, for example, would, when they thought it would be good for America to perhaps lead to a change in unjust laws, they break the law and pay the penalty?
I agree with you. And there's a big difference, though, between people in power, people who have the power of government, and people who are outside of government. It's much, much more dangerous when people who have the power of government, the power of the FBI, the power to blackmail presidents. I mean, you know what he did to John F. Kennedy. Now, I'm not suggesting that John F. Kennedy was any angel. You can't blackmail somebody who's an angel. He knew where all the bodies were. He knew who was inside every closet, and he used that kind of information to blackmail presidents to do what he best for the country. But after all, nobody ever elected him. He was appointed to be the equivalent of an assistant attorney general of the United States, and he elevated his power enormously. Thank God now we have heads of the FBI who are former judges who really respect the rule of law and understand their role. Their role is to work for the Justice Department, not to have an independent state police force which can do what he believes is right for America rather than what we, the people who vote for people in office, think is right for America. Now, I'm out of power now. My candidates never get elected anymore. Republicans seem to get elected all the time, and yet I respect the fact that I lose elections, and I would never try to take the law into my own hands. The Republicans won. George Bush makes policy. That's it. If I were in a position of government in the United States, I wouldn't try to take the law into my own hands.
Well, I'm delighted that you wouldn't try to take the law in your own hands if you were in a position in the United States government. I suggest to you that amongst the persons that you are accusing of wrongdoing, of breaking the law and what have you, would be Thomas Jefferson, who violated the law with the embargo. Then you have Franklin Roosevelt, who authorized naval warfare against Nazi Germany in violation of the Neutrality Act prior to the onset of hostilities in World War II. You had Woodrow Wilson sending the troops down into Mexico, and probably, and you, sir, are a legal scholar from Harvard University and justly famed as such, must know that Abraham Lincoln was correctly accused contemporaneously of violating the law and the Constitution of the United States.
I've been one of those who've accused him over and over again.
Right. When he submitted, he's
also suspended the writ of
habeas corpus. Exactly. Now, what those presidents have done is really, I think, philosophically aligned themselves with Cato and others who have said that the good of the people is the chief law, and they put themselves to the test. You know, the one trial, the one tribunal that is effective, and that is history.
But they were elected presidents. That is they did have a mandate to take actions. They didn't have a mandate to violate the law, but nobody ever elected J. Edgar Hoover.
Well, no, nobody elected J. Edgar Hoover, but J. Edgar Hoover was working for elected presidents. As a matter of fact, now I think you're aware of historically that in 1937. It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the icon of the Democratic Party and of liberals, who specifically ordered J. Edgar Hoover to wiretap and all the rest of it, the communists. He was very concerned about it, and he said, if my wife Eleanor says anything about it, just disregard what she has to say. And that's what got it started with Franklin Roosevelt.
That's what got it started.
And you also are aware, I think historically, that the order in writing to wiretap Martin Luther King came from that other icon of the liberals, Bobby Kennedy, when he was the Attorney General of the United States.
But I wrote the first article exposing that in the New Republic years ago, pointing the finger not only to Bobby Kennedy, but to Burke Marshall, Nick Katzenbach, others who were part of the liberal establishment. I don't ever excuse or apologize for liberals or Democrats who do wrong. The wiretapping of Martin Luther King was a total and thorough disgrace. Again, the big difference is nobody elected J. Edgar Hoover, and he had a pattern of 40 more years of violating the law. He broke the law every day. According to this new book, the biography of J. Edgar Hoover, and I don't believe everything I read in the biography, but the documentation is so complete there. It's called J. Edgar Hoover, the Man and His Secrets by Kurt Gentry.
Yeah, I'm aware of that book.
There's a lot of overstatement.
Yeah, well, I'm all over that book too. But you're so upset about constant violation of the law. If we were somehow or other, had a big television thing up in the sky, and we had all the American people out here, and everybody who was concerned about violating the law, what I'd ask him? I'd say, look, how many of you, having driver's licenses, have driven over 55? And you would find so many law violators out there.
Again, the difference between violating the law as an individual and being in a position of power, being in a position of authority, being in a position where you can ruin and destroy people's lives, as he tried to destroy Martin Luther King's life, as he succeeded in destroying so many lives during the 1950s. He was also a very ineffective law enforcement official. You know the trick.
Well, wait a minute. You're calling a man ineffective who was in charge of the FBI, which was in charge of our counter-espionage and counter-sabotage throughout World War II, and there was not a single successful act of sabotage in the United States of America by any Axis power throughout the entire Second World War. And that is because of J. Edgar Hoover.
I'm talking about as a law enforcement official. What he did is take, for example, the most wanted list, which was probably his biggest public relations ploy. What he would do was he would figure out who the FBI was about to catch when they really had him virtually in their clutches. Then he would put their name on the most wanted list.
Okay.
Then a month later, he would announce, we caught number 6, number 3, number 2, and number 1 on the most wanted list. It was a total and complete charade.
Let me ask you, Professor. I have to go to break now. Can you hang on? And
sure.
can we continue this debate, which I'm finding, very, very satisfying, and you're finding satisfying, and I'm sure all our listeners are, because you've lighted up the boards here. We're going to go to a commercial message, and then we'll be right back with Professor Alan Dershowitz of Harvard, the author of the book called Chutzpah. Liddy, we have with us Professor Alan Dershowitz, the author of a book very appropriately entitled Chutzpah. We are debating the late, and as far as I'm concerned, great J. Edgar Hoover. And one of the things that, Professor, you were saying when we had to go to a commercial break was that J. Edgar Hoover would deliberately put people on the 10 most wanted list when he really knew where they were and then catch them and so on and so forth. Now, I have some direct personal knowledge about this. When I was in the FBI, they finally had to drop off the 10 most wanted list, Frederick J. Tenuto, because they had him on there for years and years and years, couldn't catch him because we finally concluded the mob had buried him in the roadbed when they were building the New Jersey Turnpike. I was there when in Indianapolis, when we caught Ben Golden McCullum. He'd been on there, since Christ was a cadet, and I am the person who actually put the .357 Magnum pistol muzzle right to the brain of Ernest Tate, who was the only man who was twice on the 10 most wanted list. We didn't know where he was. We had to find him. And I like to take credit for that, and I don't want people to think that, before we put him on the list for the second time that we knew where he was, because we sure didn't.
There were many people, of course, who were put on the list because they were extremely dangerous and most wanted, but he always had people, and I got this from somebody inside the FBI.
Well, I was inside the FBI, and that isn't the way we did it. Believe it or not, that was a legitimate list. They would put them on there, and boy, did we have to work those cases. And when we didn't catch the guy, Hoover was pretty darn upset about it, and I don't blame him.
Well, you never heard of situations where people were put on the list for other reasons? Let me give you an example.
Go ahead, give me an example.
Kathy Boudin was put on the list, the most wanted list, the week before her father went to try the case of Dr. Spock, and it was clear at that time that the reason that she was put on the list, she had been wanted for a period of time before then, was to embarrass Leonard Boudin.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let's first of all, you and I know who Kathy Boudin is and who Leonard Boudin is and the whole case, but let's tell the people who Kathy Boudin was.
Kathy Boudin is the daughter of Leonard Boudin, and she was part of the Weather Underground and was wanted a number of times for actions in Detroit during the Days of Rage, and then eventually for a shootout in which some Brinks guards were killed in Westchester, New York.
I mean, and society frowns on killing Brinks guards and robbing, armed robbery of trucks.
The question was one of timing when she was put on the list, and she was put on the list at a time when it was maximally embarrassing to her father, not at a time. I think that would be best described a coincidence, because, as you probably know, they try to get these people, and when they can't get them and they feel they're really, really dangerous, that's when they put them on the list to get massive publicity about it. For the same, these programs they have on television now, Unsolved Mysteries. They put the people out there so that we can get the assistance of the citizens. Now, there's something else. I'm saying there's a very legitimate purpose for having a list.
Yeah, and I was there, and all in that time, he didn't do it as far as I was concerned. But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. You praise the judges. Now, there were two judges. One is Judge Sessions, who is the current director of the FBI, and then there was a man who I think was William Webster, an unmitigated disaster as the director of the FBI. He destroyed its morale. He destroyed its discipline. He destroyed its ability to function very well.
He restored its credibility.
The reason he was put on there was to throw a palliative to the Congress. He's a darling on the Georgetown cocktail circuit. And after that, after he was removed from the FBI, he gets sent to the CIA, whereupon he does the same thing and lost his job there again. Now, look, the man was probably a good judge. I have no way of determining whether he was a good judge or not, but I can tell you he was a disaster as director of the FBI.
The credibility of the FBI, which was really in deep trouble.
The FBI today has one good unit in it. It's called the HRT, the Hostage Rescue Team, and it is so good that when guys come off the Hostage Rescue Team and go out in the field, they're resented and actually, they're discriminated against. That's how bad the situation is now. I wish for once, in modern times, instead of having a judge trying to run the FBI, you get a law enforcement officer. Let's say a top police chief or someone of that sort, someone who really knows what he's doing, which end of the tube the round comes out of. These judges,
My candidate was Joe McNamara, who was the police chief of San Jose, who was a great law enforcement official, but a man who really understands that his role is not to make policy, but to enforce policy.
Now, wait a minute. Joe McNamara is the guy who keeps campaigning for another favorite cause of yours, which is gun control.
That's right.
And this is a guy who is so courageous, he actually backed out of a debate with me. I'll say this, at least you've got the courage to come up here and debate me face to face. You've done it before, and you'll do it again. But Joe McNamara won't. He's scared to death of me. I'd take him apart on gun control. That's the problem with him. He's a gun control. He's a liberal. He's a gun control advocate.
He's the police commissioner of San Jose.
That's right, San Jose. I know exactly where he is.
Very considerably. He's no longer the police commissioner. He's now retired. But he was a great potential candidate for the FBI because he knows his place. He understands that his job is to take orders from the people who were elected, not to make policy, not to blackmail presidents.
Why then, when he was in fact the police chief of San Jose, was he in the pocket of Handgun Control Inc. and the rest of them, doing their bidding, doing whatever they told him? And when he was to debate me, and they called him up and said, "Don't debate Liddy," he did it.
You are opposed to the National Rifle Association. That takes some guts. He's a gutsy guy. He also opposes the death penalty, and he's a police chief, and yet he's managed to keep the crime rate in San Jose down because he doesn't look to palliatives. He looks to real tough, on-the-street enforcement mechanisms. I wish he were a guy who were brought to New York. But in any event, we're talking about J. Edgar Hoover. And what J. Edgar Hoover did is he never went after organized crime. He didn't have the guts to go after organized crime. Instead, he went after communists, most of whom, after the time he was going after them in the 50s and the early 60s, were FBI agents. I mean, there was no communist threat in the United States at that point.
Now, come on. What do you mean? What do you mean that most of the communists in the 50s and 60s? I was FBI agent in the 50s and 60s, and one of the many things I have never even been accused of is being a communist.
Of course you weren't a communist. They were.
Well, that's what you just said. The FBI agents, the communists were FBI agents.
They were FBI FBI agents who were pretending and posing. They were
No, they had informers in the Communist Party. We had so many informers in the Communist Party that at the meetings they would say, welcome comrades and the FBI.
But that's my point. It was never that much of a threat. Organized crime.
It wasn't a threat because the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover kept it from being a threat.
Come on.
What you're doing is condemning him for his effectiveness.
No, communism was never a threat in this country. It was always a fake argument designed to give J. Edgar Hoover more power.
Oh, come on.
When you look at who he went after, Martin Luther King he accused of being a communist. He said he was the biggest liar in America.
Well, do you know why he said he was the biggest liar in America? Because Martin Luther King kept repeating the canard. J. Edgar Hoover was deliberately populating these field agencies in the South with special agents who had been born, raised, and educated in the South, and that was an absolute lie. And Martin Luther King had been shown the facts, figures, and books to prove it was an absolute lie, and he kept repeating the lie, and I don't blame him. It was a lie.
I was down in the South in the 1950s and in the 1960s particularly, and for one reason or another, the civil rights demonstrators did not trust local FBI agents. They trusted the Marshal Service, but they didn't trust the local FBI
Well, that's
agents.
probably because persons like you were telling them that they were untrustworthy, because you were condemning J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover hated Martin Luther King, hated the civil rights.
That's right, because the man kept lying about J. Edgar Hoover, in spite of the fact that he was given the facts.
Because J. Edgar Hoover was a racist.
The other thing is the reason that he was wiretapping Martin Luther King was the direct orders in writing of Bobby Kennedy.
J. Edgar Hoover asked Bobby Kennedy to give him those.
No, you know why? Wait a minute. You know why he did? Because Bobby Kennedy said wiretap, and Hoover said not unless you put it in writing.
Absolutely.
And J. Edgar Hoover wasn't going to do it unless it was in writing, and he got it in writing.
But
Do you know why?
Hoover was the one who asked.
Do you know why? Because
the reason he gave.
Because he was attending communist schools. Martin Luther King was attending schools. They've got a photograph of him sitting at the desk.
Now you're repeating this stuff. That isn't true.
It is true, and I've seen the photograph. I was there. Not only that, the reason was Bobby Kennedy was upset because he was concerned. He was concerned that the communists would influence a man who was clearly the emerging leader of the blacks in the United States. And I think that is if he was being
communist school. What did he go to? Brooklyn College? I mean, what school did he go to? Boston University?
He went to a class that was arranged by the Communist Party USA. They used to have regular instruction, and they would go in there, and he had him in there.
Communist Party class, and he went.
He was brought in there by a white guy who was a communist who was influencing him at the time.
He was from New Orleans, and that was the argument that was made, that he was being infiltrated, and that's why they had to tap his hotel room in Stockholm when he went to get the Nobel Prize and record him with a white woman and then circulate the tapes of Martin Luther King with a white woman, send it to his wife with
They
commit suicide.
They wiretapped him virtually 24 hours a day, and one of the things they found out was that it was always a white woman. It was always. He loved white women. But that's neither here nor there. You're absolutely right. Hey, we've got to go to a commercial break. White woman or black woman, we got to go to a commercial break. I'm Gordon Liddy with a spirited debate going with Professor Alan Dershowitz, author of the book Chutzpah, a bestseller, which has to do with his life. And Professor, I think you and I will probably have to agree to disagree on J. Edgar Hoover, but I'm curious. I'm a 20-some-odd-year friend of a man named Pat Buchanan, who I know you've heard of, who on December 10th, he has announced, will decide whether or not to enter a plea in New Hampshire against President Bush. What do you think of that?
Well, in my book Chutzpah, I have several pages on Pat Buchanan, on his Holocaust denial. In a column, I recently said that although he doesn't wear the same uniform as David Duke, his affinity for fascism is quite similar. He is, I think, an anti-Semite. He is somebody who has diminished the suffering of those who were victims of the Holocaust. Although he never supports the rights of people charged with crime, he has supported the rights of virtually every Nazi war criminal, to the point where the head of the Justice Department's Office of Nazi War Criminals said great numbers of people, quote, are asking themselves, why is Pat Buchanan so in love with Nazi war criminals? I hope he runs, because I hope he gets his rear kicked in. I hope he gets to see that the American public will not accept a fascist like David Duke, who raises his arm in the Heil Hitler salute, or a fascist who wears a three-piece suit. And the fact that you have indicated support for him, I hope humorously when you said in the column the other day that you would be happy to break into any place in order to help Pat Buchanan become president. I hope it was facetious. I don't mind you being his friend, but he's not a man who would be good for America.
Okay, well, you raised that issue, which was, I think, in Newsweek magazine. Let me tell you how that came about. As you know, 2 years ago, or back when George Bush was running for the first time, Pat Buchanan was trying to decide whether or not he was going to run at that time, and there was a lot of who struck John about that. And I appear lots of times, on Crossfire, and I have with Pat, and they brought me in and they said, listen, we're going to have a party here for Pat, and we want to play a trick on him. So they had a mock interview in which I not only said that I would, break into anywhere to get Pat elected, but I also said that we were going to wire Millie. That last part got dropped off, and
well,
of course
that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, wire Millie. Okay. Well, at any rate, that's what that's about. Now, I'm curious here. You say that he has a Holocaust denial and he's anti-Semitic. Now, I've known him for 20 years, and I've been a guest in his home and what have you. I have never heard him make a remark which could even be, construed in a difficult way as being anti-Semitic. What is this Holocaust denial?
Well, read his columns. He said in 1989 that Jews could not have been gassed at Treblinka, and he cited as evidence some stuff that was given to him by neo-Nazis and Holocaust deniers. He has said that Holocaust survivors have, quote, a Holocaust survivor syndrome, group fantasies of martyrdom, and heroics. He has allowed his column to be printed in the Spotlight, which I think you will acknowledge.
Yeah, that is
anti-Semitic and
it's anti-Semitic, and it's just about anti-everybody, and
right.
It's way over on the fringe. But let me ask you: does he deny that 6-7 million Jews were killed in Nazi Germany in the Holocaust?
Well, he questions it, and he doubts whether or not the Jews could have died in gas chambers, and he gets a hearing, as a New Republic article put it, from every Holocaust denier. I have challenged him to debate this issue on Crossfire, and I have now been banned from Crossfire. I used to be on it as often as you were as a guest, but since I have accused Pat Buchanan, he has told his producer that I can no longer be on his show because he is afraid. Talk about McNamara being afraid to debate you. Buchanan is afraid to debate me. I challenge him to debate me on your show, on this show, on his show.
Well, I certainly would agree with you that
Holocaust denial.
No one is going to win a debate who takes the position that there wasn't the Holocaust and that the Jews weren't killed or gassed. I mean, all you have to do is go over there and you can see all the equipment. I mean, it's there, and that's one of the reasons.
He has never traveled to see the equipment because and why should he defend Nazi war criminals? I mean, he's a guy who never defends criminals.
My understanding. Now, when we come to that, my understanding is there's this particular case of Mr. Demjanjuk, and there's the question of
there are questions there, but he's also defended Klaus Barbie, Carl Linus. He has defended the killers who were buried at Bitburg, and again, Alan Ryan, who is not Jewish, who is the head of the prosecution department and the Justice Department against Nazi war criminals, has said that he is the spokesman for Nazi war criminals in America. He's tried to dismantle the Office of Special Investigations. He used to say that the reason was because some of the information was based on communist sources, but Klaus Barbie, for example, who was the butcher of Lyon, none of the information was based on communist sources. It all came from France, and yet Buchanan supported him.
Well, I can't see.
You should ask him that question and ask him why he won't debate me. Why he is afraid to debate this issue. If he's
I will certainly discuss the Holocaust issue with him at the next opportunity, and the other ones you brought up. But I do think he, from what I have seen, I do think he may have a very good point on Demjanjuk. I think that an awful lot of investigation needs to be done into that.
I believe in all complete investigations. I was at the trial of Demjanjuk, and the Israel Supreme Court has now had the case for over 2 years. They've allowed the case to be reopened. Believe me, I think he's going to get a very fair hearing in front of that court. But speaking about Israel, why isn't Pat Buchanan, who is a hawk, who generally is anti-communist, why, of all the countries that are fighting communism, is he anti-Israel? Why has he turned against Israel? Most conservatives I know support him.
I think I can be fairly called a conservative, and I am a strong supporter of Israel because I think that Israel is the only friend we have in that entire area. The rest of them, I wouldn't turn my back on any of them.
Right. Ask Buchanan why he has
he says that he has a problem with the Likud faction only.
That's the right wing. That's the conservative. That's who he would support in the United States. Why should he be opposed to a right-wing conservative faction in Israel when he's a right-winger in the United States? Why should he deny Israel's right to protect itself?
I think it's because I think it's because the Likud faction, with which I agree, by the way, is against the so-called land for peace swap, because in my opinion, it would be insane for Israel to agree to do anything like that. The land that they took, they did not invade other people and take it. They were attacked. They took militarily significant territory in battle.
Who would give back the Golan Heights?
Well,
give back the Golan Heights if it was in America?
Well, nobody should give back the Golan Heights, and frankly, I'm a bit disgusted with the Bush policy of trying to push them into doing it.
So you should be disgusted with Pat Buchanan,
well,
who says that...
Pat Buchanan and I do have policy differences. He is isolationist, for example, and I am anything but. But I am now
He's not isolationist. He believes now he supports the PLO. He is very involved in trying to get Israel to give back the West Bank. That's not isolationist. That, it seems to me, is imposing a double standard. And, you know, when a guy comes out always on the wrong side of every Jewish issue, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's Israel, you got to really begin to question him. And, you know, I don't accuse him of being a personal anti-Semite. Indeed, some of his best friends are Jews. I know. Leonard Garment is a good friend of his. He has other good Jewish friends in Washington. It's not Jews individually. It is Jews as a group. He has this fantasy of Jewish control, of Jewish power. And that,
we know that's nonsense.
We know it's nonsense. And, you know, you're at least very consistent in your views. We disagree on some issues, but you're consistent in your support of Israel. You're consistent in a whole range of views. And I have more respect for you, frankly, than I do for Pat Buchanan. And you're also willing to debate your issues. Pat Buchanan hides behind his, you know, being a moderator of a TV show, and he won't get out there and debate the tough issues. And he won't be able to run for president unless he does.
Well, on the run for president, let me say why I am in favor of his running up there. I think you and I and every knowledgeable person in this country knows that Pat Buchanan would not have a prayer of replacing George Bush on the Republican ticket for next year. But I, as a conservative, have to tell you that I am very, very disappointed, as are just about everybody I know who feels the same way, with George Bush, with his flip-flops, which is the fact that he doesn't seem to have a compass heading, a rudder, or a keel, or anything like that. He just thinks it's neat to be president, and you know, I can't figure out what this man stands for. And we're hoping that Pat Buchanan, when he goes up there into New Hampshire, probably because of Sununu having upset the people in New Hampshire as well as a lot of other people, and as a protest against Bush, will, you know, get maybe 40% of the vote. And if he does, it may wake George Bush up and have him smell the coffee.
Well, if he goes up there, and I'm going to be tailing him at every point, challenging him to debate.
Well, you ought to. You ought to.
People of New Hampshire are decent people, and they should not vote for a David Duke with a three-piece suit.
All right. Well, listen. I hope you do, because I think it's good for the political process, and I would love to have a ticket to that debate if you can arrange it. Now, Professor, they keep telling me now I have to go to a commercial break, and then I have to take some people who want to talk about what you and I have just been talking about. So I want to thank you for coming on this program, for spending so much of your time with us. It's been a pleasure as always. We disagree, but I think there's a little mutual respect there. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
You bet. All right, this commercial message, and we'll be right back, and we'll be taking your calls on WABC Talk Radio. I'm Gordon Liddy.